old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Jedi Master UrzaMaster. With me as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. Welcome.
Hello there.
And welcome to everyone in the audience. Here, abroad, and in a galaxy far, far away. Today we're discussing episodes 2 and 3 of Andor, and I am jazzed. I have to say, I'm really excited to talk about these two episodes for a number of reasons. And I have to say, it's something that we keep bringing up, but if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to Pending Rebrand, because we're talking Andor, and we're going to be talking more Star Wars to come, even as Star Wars is on a little bit of a back order due to the ongoing strikes. But fear not, my friends. There's plenty of Star Wars to talk. Even if we got to start going to comic books and books, we will never run out of Star Wars material. But for background today, on today's episodes 2 and 3 of Andor, I turn it over to Jedi Master Psyllium Maas.
Thank you, Master, and thank you, Master Uther. And thanks to everyone that is watching and enjoying us, whether in the States, overseas, or again, far beyond the reaches of our known universe. So, Andor you have to think of in groups of 3, and with one major exception that we will get to later in the cycle. The show was designed to be told in small bite-sized story arcs, usually lasting 3 episodes. So the first episode, which we spoke of in our previous adventure, and the 2 we're going to be discussing tonight were all conceived of as a singular story arc, meaning the next time we meet, we'll be on a completely different trajectory. Many of the same faces, but in new places with new excitement and new danger to follow, and you'll pick it up as we go. So for the first 3 episodes of Andor, to kick it all off, they were all directed by the same director, Toby Haynes. Haynes is a British science fiction and genre director. He's worked on the Benedict Cumberbatch updating of Sherlock. He's worked on the modern Doctor Who. He's worked on Being Human, if you're a BBC science fiction fan, and Black Mirror on Netflix, or it's now available on Netflix, Black Mirror, which for any science fiction fans who are enjoying our commentary on Star Wars and Star Trek, I would recommend checking out Black Mirror. It is a updated sort of Twilight Zone exploration of mankind and technology, and it goes to some very dark, humorous, and interesting places. So if you've always wanted to try it, I would say jump right in and check a couple out, because they definitely are worth your marker. And Haynes directed the famous USS Callister episode of Black Mirror, which was, in its own way, a spot-on parody homage to Star Trek, but done, again, with a very subversive slant. So Emmy-nominated episode, USS Callister of Black Mirror, Haynes was responsible. Tony Gilroy, the showrunner, was the writer for these first 3 episodes. He continues in that role in episodes 2 and 3, and we talked about his extensive credits, how he brought the Bourne franchise to life, but filled it with more than just great martial arts action, but real gritty espionage and spycraft and so forth. I also wanted to bring up the composer for Andor. His name is Nicholas Britell. He's a New Yorker. He's done a lot with Adam McKay who was Will Ferrell's writing and producing partner for many years. Bertel, our composer for Andor, has worked on The Big Short, Vice, the Netflix film all-star cast Don't Look Up. He was the principal composer for HBO's Succession, if you enjoyed that backstabbing drama. And he also worked on Academy Award winner Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk. Moonlight, you will remember, is the film that was not read as Best Picture when Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway gummed that up. It actually should have been the one announced, and they instead gave it to La La Land and created much drama before Will Smith took it upon himself to top that with the slap heard around the world. But I digress. Nicholas Bertel is our composer, and I was mentioning to UrzaMaster before the show, next time you put on an Andor, don't skip the credits, the opening sequence. Don't skip right to the good stuff, friends. Listen to the opening title music, because Bertel, whether he was being a little cheeky or whether he was being very experimental, he's taken the same melody, the same title theme that he's created for this show, and in each of the 12 episodes, he composes it and plays it with different instruments in different settings. So, for example, in episode 2, you hear Andor, and you hear it with heavy strings, violins, cellos, and so forth. In episode 3, which we'll talk about tonight, you hear the exact same theme, but with heavy synthesizer, no strings. But it's the same music. And when we talk about further episodes, you'll hear it again portrayed in a different light. And I don't know if that's never been done in Hollywood before, but it isn't done often. Everyone wants to get a repetitive, catchy theme, or theme song. Think Cheers and Friends. But this is fun. If you know what you're listening for, listen to the opening of Andor through each episode, and you will hear again. You'll recognize the melody, but it won't be presented quite the way you were expecting. So, and like a good book that unfolds chapter to chapter, we have our characters from the first episode that return, portrayed by Diego Luna and Kyle Solar and Adria Orjana. But we've added some new faces to these episodes, building the wall one brick at a time. Fiona Shaw joins us as Marva. You've known her primarily as Aunt Petunia in the Harry Potter franchise. She also had an extended role in HBO's True Blood for a spell during the mid-seasons. Fiona Shaw brings a great gravity, and we learn in these episodes how she and Cassian intersected. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And of course, you have the magnificent Stellan Skarsgård, who the first time we see him on camera just instantly captures your gaze, and you don't want to take it off, because he has got an iron-piercing stare and such gravitas and chemistry, and he's earned that over a career spanning decades. You've enjoyed him in Good Will Hunting, Ronin, Steven Spielberg's Amistad, Rennie Harlin's Deep Blue Sea. That's the Giant Sharks Eat Sam Jackson picture. He's been in Angels and Demons with Tom Hanks. He's been in Pirates of the Caribbean in at least 2 of the sequels. He's been in Mamma Mia, showing off his song and dance. And take it from me, he's a better hoofer than Pierce Brosnan. He was in the remake of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. He played the corpulent Baron Harkonnen in the latest remake of Dune, and will continue to appear in that franchise. And of course, he's done his Marvel work in Thor as Professor Selvig, studying the Tesseract. So you love him, you know him, and boy, does he make an impression in this show. So what are these 2 episodes about? Well, we're further going to explore Cassian, who's kind of a heel, who's kind of basically burned, or is in the process of burning, every bridge of any relationship that he has. Whether it's casual acquaintance or loved ones or former loved paramours. This is the guy that, again, we talked about this last week. He tries to hit you up at Thanksgiving for a loan. And even though you are feel some empathy or compassion towards your fellow mankind, you don't want to slip this guy any Imperial credits, because it's not going to drugs or ill-gotten gains, but he's very shifty when we first meet him. Far from the stalwart Rebel Alliance commander we will know in Rogue One, and so forth. So we see Cassian here basically desperate. He knows the authorities are pursuing him for killing the officers on the corporate world in Episode 1. And he's got a bit of Imperial merchandise, a navigation device that the Imperials use, factory fresh. Seals are still on it. And he knows that to the right black market buyer, that's his ticket off of Ferrix. But it doesn't matter who he takes advantage of or who he owes money to, he's going to try to get it. And we see that in his relationship, in his interaction with Marva when we first meet them, when he tries to BS her. And of course, she's already heard that there's a warrant out for his arrest, thanks to their lovable droid B2 EMO. And you know, he doesn't even flinch when she calls him out on his lies and his BS. He just rolls with it and keeps running roughshod kind of over her. And you get the sense they've had conversations like this before, maybe not with the stakes so high. But that leads me to the first thing I want to talk about, and this actually will span the second and the third episode. You have to kind of think of these two as kind of really one long 90-minute episode. It just makes more sense dramatically, and it's sort of easier to bring all this into the discussion, especially since it was directed and written by the same team. But we get to see how Marva and Cassian, aka Casa, first met, and those go to the flashbacks back on Kenari, when Casa and his tribe set out and found a separatist freighter that had crashed on their home world. And the crew wasn't quite dead and ended up trying to fight. And we see the Kenarians using just simple blowpipes and primitive weapons. They're not walking around with lightsabers and blasters, but they subdue the enemy and they take their wounded away. But Casa stays behind and explores this downed ship, and even it appears gets a first glimpse of what he looks like. Apparently reflective surfaces are not part of the Kenarian tradition, and it kind of freaks him out. And into this come a couple of scavengers, smugglers, Marva, her husband Clem, and a revitalized, much younger B2 EMO. And Marva, knowing that the rebellion or the Imperials or the Republic, I guess in this era, are going to be arriving to check out this downed freighter, she makes a bold move and she basically kidnaps Casa. They don't understand each other. They can't communicate with each other. But she makes a decision that she's saving him, and spirits him away in her starship. And we see them actually leaving planet. And this would then begin sort of an adoptive relationship where she would basically take him into her home and raise him as her own. But I got to ask you guys, unlike, say, Kyle ending up in a Kansas cornfield in the DC universe, for example, it's kind of ambivalent. Did she do him a favor by separating him from his tribe, by leaving those other children with, I mean, they didn't know about them per se, but without doing any due diligence or anything, did they basically sentence those kids to death, including his own sister, whom we've seen that he's looking for when the series begins? Is this something that may have made him into kind of the shifty, not to be trusted person that we see, as we're introduced to him? Like, I'm just curious how you feel about it, because I think the standard fantasy approach is, well, thank God that the white savior was there to liberate him. But I feel like the storytelling and Tony Gilroy, I think he kind of wants you to maybe stop for a second and say, I don't know how comfortable I am with how it all shook out. I mean, so I throw it out to you as sort of a philosophical moral grounding, which Star Wars does not like to play with, don't forget. They're all about myth building and mythology, but this one kind of says, wait a minute, what do you think about that?
I mean, it's tough, right? I thought, you know, I thought this would be a lot easier if this was an Imperial thing that they were saving him from. But you do kind of realize, like, was he really in as much danger as they kind of painted it out to be? Or was this just a scared kid that they didn't really know what to do with, but they didn't want to leave any witnesses behind?
See, there's that, yeah.
There's a little bit of that. But I think at the same time, like, especially the characterization, I go back to the acting. There was definitely love there. Like, that's what came through the acting for me later in life, between the two. There was some protective nature, but there was also some, like, genuine caring for this kid. Like, you know, hey, like, he's scared and uncivilized. Let's rescue him, kind of thing.
Rescue, right.
I think rescue's to be taken lightly, but at the same time, it's kind of, I think there was good intent. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of one of those gray areas that, well, as a graying Jedi, I think it's interesting to see painted out in a way that it's sympathetic, but it's also kind of, you know, through a modern lens, you're kind of like, is this as pure of heart as it is supposed to come across, or is this kind of that, like you said, white savior thing that they're trying to flip on its head a little bit? And it does. It provokes you to think, which I think is fantastically done. That's great writing. It's something that I don't think Star Wars really does all that well in its other versions that we've seen and we'll talk about in the future, especially some of the adoptive type parent things, you know, the Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru situation. It's like, well, clearly they cared for him, but were they really just stifling him? Were they really just, you know, forcing their own idiom on something they really didn't deserve?
Understand, or, yeah.
You know, or understand. And it's very cool.
I'm just glad that
not
they
for
asked,
judgment.
they kind of raised the question, I guess. I mean, you know, I've taken in stray cats before and fed them and all of that, and that comes too from good intention and a good place. But I don't know. The more times I've re-seen this now a few times, the more times I kind of think like, man, it's just they just didn't hesitate. I mean, she didn't. Her husband, Clem, was not a fan of the move, but she's just like, he's coming with us, and it almost reads as almost a kidnapping in one light. I mean, as opposed to like, oh, you know, there's Imperial stormtroopers on that ridge, we've got to get you out of here. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's bold. It's really interesting that they would pose this question, but you know, it's something I have to say, I think we've all probably thought these questions about the greater, you know, unseen portion of the galaxy. You know, like we always talk about the Skywalkers and the hoity-toity sort of Jedi, and the down and dirty Sith, but there's a whole lot of other stuff going on in this galaxy, and those are the compelling stories that, frankly, I'm for. Let's hear it. Let's hear the real world problems that they're dealing with, and they don't necessarily need to solve them. That's the thing. It's like just posing that in the situation and being like, well, you know, again, it's shades of gray. Bing.
Bing.
I like it.
Yeah, from our perspective, it might not look right, but from her perspective, I kind of think it does, because he's in there smashing stuff up. I guess he kind of seems uncivilized, and what's civilized, that's a whole discussion that could take up probably 30 podcasts about what civilization, you know, really is, or what we consider civilized and not civilized. But, you know, I thought that were they wearing masks when they first went in there?
Right.
Were they
There
masked
was
up?
some sort of gas
So,
leak.
yeah. So I mean, my gut says it's the right move. Going on, if I was to see it from their perspective, and I can see why her husband is obviously not really thrilled or feeling good about this idea of it happening. Plus, I think when you put the spin on it like you did, because it's it's the rebellion or the republic, and it's not the empire. Does it make it even worse? So it would have been better if it was the empire, right? It would have been like, oh, okay, she's going to save him from the empire.
Well, you said
This
something.
is okay.
You said something provocative there. That's interesting.
Of course I did, because that's what I do.
Because that's what you do. You talked about civilization and the assumption. Again, like I said, this is all subtext. You have to cleave a little deeper to find it. But I think what Tony Gilroy is suggesting is they just assume that this sort of wild child that they can't understand is somehow like, the feral kid from the Road Warrior. Like, they haven't seen his encampment, where it appeared by all accounts they were living in relative peace and harmony with each other and had their own system of shelter and presumably, gathering food and leadership. And I mean, it's just sort of the assumption that he's not civilized, wherein in fact there's a completely different possibility of what civilization on this this world we later learn was abandoned after mining accidents, and you see the strip mine, that they've just left the world like with a scar. So that's even more interesting to me that you said that, Uther, because like I say, so they just assume like, well, we've got to like Tarzan, we've got to take him out of the jungle and put him in a suit and teach him how to read, and it's just like, I mean, it kind of echoes sort of that thought process. But I think what the show is trying to do, again, as Master said, not necessarily answer it, but at least make you go, So.
Yeah, I mean, it does that. I mean, and if we talked about Avatar, we could have that whole discuss. I mean, there's a lot, right? With that's just a play on Native American and Native American civilization and Americans. So there's a lot that goes into that. But again, if you're, I think, putting myself in their shoes or her shoes, it probably is the right move. If you've got a mask on because you're afraid of dying from the gases that are in there and things like that, maybe it was the right move. Again, not fully on board with it, but I think I'm a little more on board with it than the two of you are, which understandably so. So here's my question or my point, and this kind of is an UrzaMaster thing. The droids are just so different in every single episode. I mean, every single series, and B2EMO again has its own personality and one that you just gravitate to.
Yes.
Like you kind of feel sorry for him, but he can be a little bit sly, and he's very protective. He's kind of like, here's what he reminds me of. He reminds me of the old dog that's around the house.
Just gonna say
that you love and understands you and gets you and will do anything for you because it's got unconditional love for you. Like, you could almost feel the love radiating off of B2EMO. But the amazing point that you brought up several times, which now I am completely addicted to and on board with, is every time, besides maybe BB-8, which was obviously an R2-D2 clone that just rolled around instead of having legs and being on wheels, every other, like K2SO, I think I said that name right, from Rogue One.
Rogue One.
How unique was that robot? Or Huang from the last, or from Ahsoka, right? Like, they do this amazing job of creating these very unique droids that you just kind of, you fall in love with, or you appreciate, or you see how they all add something to the story, right? There's never really been a droid where you've been like, we could have done without him. All these droids at one point or another, like, you've needed them to be a part of the story. And I think that's been something great that I see here too.
Even UrzaMaster, who said he loved the Kenobi series, which I'm sure we'll get around to discussing on The Great Jedi, they had the hydraulic lifter droid, which didn't have a line, right? It only communicated non-verbally and so forth, but by the time that droid's fate is revealed, if your heartstrings aren't pulled in terms of what it does for sacrifice. I mean, yes. So, what do you say, UrzaMaster? You're a droid guy.
Yeah, I mean, the old dog is spot on. That's exactly from the first glimpse we get of it in the first episode, and especially in these two episodes, you see it when it was younger and more spry. You kind of fall in love with it, and it's great writing, and it's good characterization too, which I think is unique to Star Wars. I don't know, other than like Data, you don't necessarily get that from a Star Trek or any other sci-fi series where you kind of develop sort of an emotional response to an inanimate object otherwise. And although these are animated objects and, have sort of a AI type life of their own, but it's tremendous, the diversity of creatures and humans, and then you get this diversity of droids throughout this franchise, and hats off, because they are all kind of universally droid-like, and they have sort of interconnected droid living and existence, but they are literally a separate society of their own. Even though they function within the societies they're in, it's so incredible to see, and they're very interesting, just focal points of personality throughout every scene that they're in, whether it's R2D2 zapping a little bot or something like that. It's always entertaining, and it is what kind of humanizes, oddly enough, some of these stories, because some of them are a little out there, and sometimes it's the droid's function to reel you in and give you that emotional support while you're in that moment.
So here's I gotta ask another question. Too
Go
bad
ahead.
there, Psyllium Maas. Which series are the droids more important? Star Wars or Star Trek? Just the robot, AI, all of that stuff. Which one is it more important to the plot line? To the overall story?
Yeah, I mean, Star Trek has, Majel Barrett's computer voice that's guided us for generations, so to speak. So, I mean, if you count that as,
Data, lore,
not
board.
just Data and all that. I mean, Data, lore, and all of them before were all sort of part of a similar family tree. And there's probably, I mean, and then we had the androids in What Are Little Girls Made Of, that we just talked about on the Warp Core, if you're following Pending Rebrand and our Star Trek theme series. Of
course they are.
Check that out. But I think Star Wars kind of came and ran with it. I'm not afraid of AI if it looks like Star Wars. Now, Skynet and the T-1000, I'm terrified of, and I still lock the doors at night for fear that they'll come looking for me to change history. But George Lucas leaned in 1977 when robots were like Robbie the Robot from Lost in Space, or, the Metropolis droid that inspired C-3PO's design. Like, he made them, as you say, he sort of anthropomorphized them, gave them characteristics that we could recognize, human characteristics. And again, it's like if that old dog on your porch could have a conversation with you, then, I mean, he sort of gave them those personalities. So I absolutely give the edge to Star Wars there, in terms of just treating it like it's just any part of the universe. It's not new and strange, and people are like, oh my gosh, that droid can talk. It's just, they're used for slave labor. They're used for, martial law. They're a whole part of this universe, this galaxy that's been built out over millennia. And I think that they keep coming up with new and cool ways to sort of do that. And by the way, until we get to the movies, I won't spend too long on it. But I am a big BB-8 fan, so let's just move ball. So we'll touch on that there. So there's sort of three more buckets we want to touch on before we go into hyperspace. The first is Cyril Karn, our favorite corporate agent. who feels that investigating this case, if he doesn't give it his all, he's not worth the uniform. And in this case, we see a man who teams up with an equally fanatic sergeant, Sergeant Maas. God love him and his accent. As they go in pursuit of that renegade outlaw, Cassian Andor. And he gives just about the worst pep talk you'll ever hear outside of like a morning shift meeting at Walmart. I just loved the faces, the bored and resentful faces of the troops that he was allegedly in charge of, knowing that they knew a hell of a lot more about what they were supposed to be doing than he ever would. And just the idea of this sort of office Rainn Wilson type, like, you know, suddenly finding himself on the front lines and being woefully unprepared. But that leads me to sort of our second bucket on this. Obviously, the raid to capture Cassian Andor goes horribly awry, and we'll talk about Cassian and Luthen's involvement in that shortly. But as far as from Cyril's point of view, you know, he kind of went behind his superiors. He organized this posse to go and retrieve the villain so he could get the glory and the accolades and the promotion and all of that. And it literally blows up in his face with wounded, dying, dead, and the prize slips away. And it's just the shock, like that wasn't supposed to happen, look on his face, and sort of the anguish of holy bleep, I'm going to be in trouble when I get back to the office, kind of like, I don't know, did you guys, UrzaMaster seeing it for the first time and Lord Uther revisiting it, do you start to feel sorry for the little worm? Or is it just like his karmic comeuppance at being that guy in the office that you don't want to have lunch with in the break room? Like, how do you read that in terms of not just the acting performance, but just, again, the characterization of, gee, I don't know if, you know, I kind of feel bad for him.
It's a little bit of both. I have to admit. It's mostly one, but a tiny bit of the other. Most of it is me feeling like I felt like when Grima Wormtongue got thrown out of the keep. You know, real vindication. You know, it was that righteous comeuppance. But there's a small part of me that sees the look of horror on his face when he realizes he's failed. And not only has he failed just in his own personal mission where he's set this sort of standard for himself that he's holding himself to and failed to meet his own expectations. But now he's getting that oh shit moment where he's like, I'm in trouble. And I've seen this look on people's faces. You see it on little kids a lot, where they kind of realize, uh-oh, and like not like the uh-oh where you can kind of laugh about it and clean up the spilled milk, but the uh-oh where it's like, uh-oh, I'm actually in trouble now. This is not going to be good. And you kind of feel bad. Like, I don't know, it's just an empathy thing, but it's like I do kind of feel bad for the guy because it's like, look, you really were doing what you thought was the right thing, what you absolutely at your core believed to be the right thing. As misguided as that is, I kind of feel bad for you because now you have to go with the realization of how the real world works. And, you know, as much as a jackass a person can be, you kind of got to feel bad for that person because they, in their heart of hearts, had full faith in what they were doing. And it just, in this case, literally blew up in his face. And now that's the fallout, you know, you have to take sometimes.
He is the CO from West Point that lands in Vietnam and tries to start telling the soldiers what to... It's the guy my dad hated when he was in Nam. And like, no, soldier, you can't, you know, you can't put your machine gun on the helicopter like that. My dad's like, then I'm not flying the mission because I'm not going to get shot up and go down. Like, you're fresh here, you're green. There's no way it's going to happen. So yeah, he's the guy you love to hate, right? Without a doubt. You're rooting against the guy the whole time. But there's another part that came up that I talk to my students a lot about. And it's the part where the local population start ringing the bells because they're trying to warn each other. And I've told my students several times over the years, and I think it's pretty accurate because I continue to tell them it, but it's very easy to conquer. It's very tough to hold. And the biggest reason why it's tough to hold is the local population is going to get sick of you and rise up against you. So even though this is some dumb local security force, the people know about this, right? Like, because they talk about, like, what are they doing here? Oh, they must be looking for someone, because that's when they show up, right? And they've even come up with this intricate system to warn each other about it. So I think this goes back to the same theme that we've talked about over and over and over again, like the cycle continues, right? They can't get it right. We're going to see it again when the Republic takes over again, you know, but that idea that the local population doesn't want him there, we're seeing that in full effect. And we're seeing, and the guy's like, we got to get out. And the reason why he's telling Cyril, we got to get out of here, is because he knows what's going to happen. Those people are going to come after them next. And then I'm not going to ruin anything down the road, but we continue to kind of see this from that local population. So that's something else to kind of keep in our back pocket as we move along here. Conquering is easy. Holding is extremely tough, because that local population is going to get sick of it. Even if they want you there, they're going to get sick of you, because they just want to have their own lives, and they're going to get you out one way or another, and you don't want it to be the other way, because that's when you start getting wounded and people die.
And first of all, the citizens of Ferrix, like, they're down to banging things. I want that job of that guy who would sound the nightly tolls and the morning bells. Just go up there and just hit something as hard as you can several times to let people know it's time to leave work or it's time to go to work. So I want that job. Although I don't know if I could bang it hard enough to make the sound there. Okay, real quick, let's touch on Bix and Tim, because everyone knows it's not a great idea to sleep with the boss, especially if your ex is currently got an arrest warrant out for him. This might be the first Star Wars that ever features a booty call. I mentioned that to Master UrzaMaster before the show started. And, I mean, you can't blame Tim, that's the owner of the junk shop, for falling for her. But, of course, what does he do? He starts drinking a little too much at the cantina, misreads a conversation that she's having with Cassian, which is as far away from romance as you're going to get. And then phones in the anonymous tip, which I will confess, in my youth, I think I did that once or twice when people were throwing loud parties. So I'm guilty of that as well, yes, sure. But hey, we were young, right? But yes, and then Tim pays for his crimes, such as it is, tries to be a misguided hero, and walks right into an ambush from the frightened security forces, who are just compounding their errors once they reach planetside there. And so you have, Bix, who's been roughed up and handcuffed to the adobe wall, and then she watches the guy who basically betrayed Cassian get gunned down in the middle of the street, and then they're like, let's get out of here, just leave his body there. So it's a lot. And once again, it's a great moment, because you see how just Cassian, even by not being there, has completely left wreckage in his steed. He's brought law enforcement into their midst. A man who, I don't know if you want to just call him completely innocent, is dead. The woman he probably once, shared a bed with has, been traumatized. Like, his home with Marva, has been ransacked and overturned, and she's sitting in the wreckage. He leaves a trail of destruction in his wake, and it doesn't seem to faze him at this point. Like, he's somewhat oblivious to it, because he's only concerned about himself. So thank God he then falls into the orbit of Luthen, who we are meant to surmise is more than just a black market dealer, but in fact might have ties to the rebellion, because he says that one of the best lines of the show, and the show has got great lines: "Don't you want to fight these bastards for real?" which suggests that there's more going. And he doesn't even care about Cassian's tech. He actually came to see if Cassian was who he thought he was, and if he could be of use to this rebellion. And I think their conversation and their back and forth, before all the action starts to take place, the negotiation, that's classic Tony Gilroy, and it's a marvel to listen to, because Cassian just wants the money and he wants to split, and Luthen is testing him to see how shallow or how committed he would be. And when he asks Cassian about, how did you get this? I'll give you 1,000 more credits if you tell me. And then he hears in Cassian the passion, like, they don't, you put on a uniform and you act like you belong there. It's like they couldn't dream that a sewer rat like me could get into their house and steal their stuff. Like, and you can hear the rage, building up from a lifetime of oppression and all of that. And that's when Luthen realizes there's something there. There's a spark there that could be ignited. So I want to talk about what will become the central relationship of the show, even if they're not sharing screen time. Luthen, like I say, just sort of steps up and just commands the scene. This is a rebel leader, probably like Forrest Whitaker saw Gerrera, who, spoiler alert, keep your eyes open. This is not a safe. This is a guy who's going to get his hands dirty. It looks like he has. He's always he's telling Cassian, I put bombs on the walls, and I've got you always have to have a plan, and like this. And he says, kill him when they get the draw on Cyril. He just doesn't hesitate, kill him. Like, he's ruthless, right? He's ruthless. Even more so than a Han Solo's kind of scoundrel way. I mean, this guy would kill you without even blinking, and he wouldn't think about it 5 minutes after he did it. And I just want to talk briefly about, like I say, the Skarsgård, Diego Luna sort of back and forth there, and the uneasy alliance that they have formed going forward. Because like I say, that's electrifying in its possibilities.
Well, that's the freedom fighter way, right? The rebellions, they may be lofted up as these good people, these holier than thou types, but we see it in basically everything that's come after the original trilogy. And even in the Republic, there were a lot of people who were just sort of out for themselves or profiteers. And they all survived into the Empire and did just fine. And after the Empire, and it's not the rot of society necessarily, but the truth of life. There are people out there who allow their simplistic emotions to drive them. In this case, it's his anger against the Empire. It's how he feels slighted by whatever the Empire has done to him. He's anything Empire, he hates it. It's a bitter division that, that could very well be justified. I mean, the Empire is obviously supposed to be the bad guy here. But, again, we talk shades of gray. Andor is not exactly the nicest guy, even though he may become a hero. The Rebellion, not made up of the nicest people, even though they may have the most glorious, positive intentions in the world, or the galaxy in this case. Likewise with the Empire. They aren't all Sith. They're not all Palpatine. Some of these are hired guns who, simply put, went to the highest amount of credits. And or you've got, people in the ranks who are just like, just play the game, collect your paycheck, and go home. Or they're hardcore, like, I have to do my duty. It's the right thing. Or I have to do my duty because I like killing. That's what it boils down to. And any freedom fighter group is going to have that. You're going to have your absolute radicals who may, in fact, be detrimental to what otherwise may be a very reasonable, legitimate movement. I think we see that play out on the world stage quite frequently in real life. And this is just a magnification of those real life events that the truth is, nobody's pure. Even Yoda probably has some secrets, and
Yes.
but that doesn't mean that those with sullied backgrounds might not rise up and become something great, and vice versa.
Is it more upsetting to you two and to viewers who are enjoying The Graying Jedi? Is it more upsetting to consider the Empire as not necessarily evil, that there may have been people just trying to get through the day? Or is it more upsetting to think of the rebellion as not something with high ideals, but willing to get down and do terrorist-like things in order to further their cause? Like, which one is sort of more upsetting as a Star Wars fan to kind of ponder? Like, maybe the Imperials, there were some people there that, weren't all Nazi fascists, or that the rebellion may have had some truly despicable people, but again, on the right side of the argument.
That's the argument at war, right? Armies that slaughter each other, 90% of them don't even want to be there.
Right.
They're doing their duty, or they're doing what they needed to do to feed themselves. And yeah, I think the most upsetting part about it is that it's harder, I think, to think of the Empire as not completely filled with bad people, because that's what they're lifted up to be in the original trilogy. Like, you want to think of them as universally evil, and I think just experience sake tells us that that's obviously could not be the truth. It's just not possible. Because they're made up of people, and people like creatures, of course. But it's also fiction, right? It's a movie. You have to be comfortable somewhat with the fact that, there are bad apples and good apples on both sides, always. But predominantly speaking, I think you're usually correct. The rebellion is by and large good, even though there's probably some bad there. And vice versa. The Empire is by and large bad, even though there's probably some good people. And there may have been parts of the Empire which blossomed, elevated societies and were heralded and welcomed. Think of the Sudetenland. There were definitely people there very welcoming to their invaders, and did very well for a brief period until war ripped them apart. And may have been resentful, and fought even more fervently for their side, for the Empire, because they were doing so well. That's why war profiteers encourage war, and that's why some of these warlords we're seeing in these post-Empire stories love the Empire. Why they're like, we need to get the Empire back because they just let us do our thing. The New Republic or the Rebel Alliance, they don't want us out here profiteering off of slave labor or whatever trade, whatever kind of dark underworld we're sowing. They don't want that. They're trying to make a good empire. And the truth be told is, no matter what you do, and we see we saw it in Ahsoka, the new Republic is just kind of a toddler, really, and all governments in some respect only have so big a scope of control, and it's kind of the classic, do your elected officials really have anything to do with your day-to-day life? Fact of the matter is they don't. 90% of the time, they do not affect your life at all. The 10% can really count. So, that's kind of, if you want to get real abstract here, that's kind of the argument that's being presented is, these microcosm stories are compelling because the question is begged, was the Empire all that bad? Is the New Republic that much better? And those are the stories that I crave, and that's what I find very exciting about this Andor story, is like, you're really getting a glimpse into like real life in the Empire.
Well, you need a Luthian in order to have a rebellion.
Right.
You need a Cassian to have a rebellion. You need someone that's they straddles both sides of the line, right? Because he has to, because that's what you have to do. Let me give you another little reminder in a sense. I believe there was a group of young guys in the 13 colonies that were pulling different types of acts and stunts to go against English rule, and they had to do that. They had to be that guy or those people in order to make their revolution happen.
Right.
Which we can have the discussion, which again could probably take up 30 podcasts, about which one was better. You know, did it really matter? Because when the British left here, things might have been better, and that's usually what happens too. And I think we were kind of seeing it with Ahsoka, Mandalorian. Things are better at first, and you kind of hit that peak, and now what? How do you keep it all together? Which kind of seems to be the theme of this episode in a sense, because we keep going back to it. How do you keep it from falling apart? It's not that easy. You need, all these people to be on board in order to keep the peace or to keep the ideals moving forward. And that's not an easy thing to do. I also think the scene between Luthen and Cassian in that like storage area
Warehouse.
where they're going back and forth, you could almost see Luthien's purposely prodding him to almost turn him. We talk about turning to the light or turning to the dark side. He's turning this guy into a rebel. Like he like you guys said, he sees that moment and he asks these questions, right? It kind of reminds me of this guy that I see on Facebook Reels a lot. And he talks about selling and how you're always going to get people to say yes by asking questions a certain way. And that's kind of, hold on a second. Like it's kind of, excuse me. That's kind of what Luthien does, right? He's asking him a series of questions to get Cassian to go, "Oh yeah, like you're right," or you're kind of turning me, even to the point that when that things start falling down from the ceiling, Cassian shows his true self and pushes Luthien out of the way so he doesn't get hurt. Would Cassian from episode, like the first episode or second episode, done that? I don't know. He might have gone after that box and taken it and gotten out of there because that's what would have been best for him. Was it really best for him to save Luthien? I don't know. He knew how to get out. He knew where to go. He knew what he had to do. So we kind of see that turn starting to happen right there, and Luthien taking that leap of faith, like we need this guy. And sometimes when you need that guy, in situations like that, you'll do whatever it takes to get that guy. And we see it here. That's why, to both your points again, that's why this might be the best Star Wars show right now, because like we continue to say, we're asking those deeper questions beyond, the light side and the dark side. I mean, everything we're seeing in this show makes us question, probably makes us question our own morals. It makes us question the government, what's good and bad. Is it, you're going to pick one of the lesser evils. You've heard that before too, right? Like, it's not really good, but it's the lesser of the two evils, so I guess I'll take that one. I think we're seeing a lot of that, and especially as Master Psyllium Maas and I know, as you progress through this series, that comes to light even more. Stop there for right now.
I have two more quick hits before we start talking about what we thought of it. Again, I just love little dialogue asides, and one of my favorites of these two episodes, besides the conversations with Cassian and Luthen, when Cassian wants to go off-world, he goes to basically the bus depot, the shuttle depot, and tries to book passage. And he says, I need to get out of here. Well, the guy's like, when? He's like, today. And he's like, give me a number. Cassian tells him, and the guy quotes him a price, like 1,000 credits. And I just, right away, he's just like, give me a real number. And I loved that, just sort of, give me a real number. And I also, every single one of us, regardless of how old or young you are, if you've ever been in public transportation, an airplane, a bus, just waiting in a lobby, you've had that conversation that Luthen has when he arrives on Ferrex with the man who just won't stop talking to him, and the look of disdain that comes through without really being rude, but just the way he looks at him as if he was an insect in a jar. Like Luthen would just as soon just like, whip out a blaster and silence this fellow. And the guy just cheerfully says, "Oh, they'll get you with the fees, and it's too expensive. And what are you into?" "Oh, I'm into," and he doesn't answer him. And there's not a single question of his that he answers. He just stares at him. And it's just a wonderful moment because we've all been there, darn it. We've all just basically
absolutely.
like, just leave me alone. I'm just here to do my thing and get out of town. So I thought I loved that whole thing.
Truly, one of those brilliant moments. And we described Andor in the last episode as being, kind of the grown-up version of Star Wars, if you will, if there is such a thing. And it's really shining through. Like, as an adult, I really appreciate this show. It's moments like that and the moral questions and sort of it's not as black and white as your traditional Star Wars. There aren't good guys and bad guys. It's very much shades of gray, and as we are the graying Jedi, it's perfect for us. I think it's a really good opportunity here, though, to ask the question of what else is the rebellion in this case. There is a sequence at the very end of this episode 3, where you get shots of all these people that Cassian has touched all their lives, and the idea of this reckoning. Is it the reckoning of Cassian, or is it the rebellion reckoning? Is it an awakening in that sense? I'll give you my take first, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. My take is that, and we mentioned this in the first episode when we started talking about Andor, is this is the journey to radicalization. And that takes many shapes and many forms, and it takes many triggers. This is the event that is opening up these hearts and minds to the idea of fighting against these forces that just kind of came in and forced themselves upon this place to find one person. Now, that one person you might blame for what just happened, but you realize that, like, the real problem is the second guy. The second guy gets the flag, right? That's just real adult life. Like, yeah, this guy's kind of a jerk, but it's not really his fault. It's the guy that shot this guy, or it's the guy that ransacked my apartment, or it's the guy that, just walked through our working space and just completely disrespected us. Like, I mean, these are real life people, in the fictional sense, of course, getting turned to something, even though they may have been the next person to turn Cassian Andor in. And that, I think, is really very unique, but also very telling of the human condition. So I found that to be a brilliant finish to this episode. So I want to know what you guys think.
I want to zoom in on a moment in that sequence, and it's with his friend Brasso. Now, we've already seen in episode 1 when he comes to him and says, basically, "I need an alibi for last night," and they talk back and forth on how that's going to look. And Brasso is the guy who gets up dutifully, goes in and works in the scrap yards all day, an honest day's wages, while Cassian's off, doing his get-rich-quick stuff. So Brasso does something heroic, and I say heroic in the sense that he's trying to help Cassian and maybe strike a blow against the authorities, and he rigs their dropship. Like, there's a brief shot of him walking away from the dropship, and then later when it tries to take off, it's been cabled, and the cabling, in fact, he commits homicide because the cabling throws the ship into the superstructure of the wreckage, the scrap, and blows up the pilot and the ship, presumably. And then we cut to, as you say, this montage of people of Ferrix sort of maybe having their awakening. And here's Brasso. He never actually stood there and watched what he did, but he knew what his actions were likely to foretell. He may have seen the explosion afterwards. And he looks haunted in the cantina. Like, I've taken a life. I don't know why. I don't know what Cassian has done. He's my friend. He owes me money, and he's not very honest with me. Like, what what line did he ask me to cross that I willingly crossed as his friend, but now I have to live with those consequences? And I think, whether it's Marva or Bix or Brasso or any of it, it's like you say, it's an awakening. It's sort of their eyes are open to, we can no longer just trust the status quo. We can no longer just get up, move through our day, eat our supper, go to sleep with the boss. I mean, things have changed. They've crossed a Rubicon, and we're in a whole new territory, and their lives will never be the same again. And I think what I was hitting on in the earlier episode, part of the episode, is that Cassian is completely oblivious to any of that emotional reckoning or wreckage that he leaves behind. Like, again, his interest is in his neck. It's getting off planet now with Luthen, whom he doesn't trust necessarily. But, he's not thinking about, I've got to go back and help Bix, or I've got to go back and get Marva and B2. Like, he's, and that to me is interesting. The selfishness, I guess, and how will that be like sort of leached out of him or drummed out of him by the time we reunite with his character in Rogue One? How does that escape? And like you say, it could be this idea of radicalization. Like, how do you go from someone who doesn't give a crap about the world to, this is my cause, right? This is my banner. This is the flag I hold up proudly. I'm on Team Rebellion, Team Rebel Alliance, and my cause is worthy. So, I mean, I think that's what we're seeing there.
I think that in order to get to the greater good or the greater cause, it's got to affect you personally first, because that's going to get you there. So for him to even start going down this path, he's looking out for himself first, which when we've seen a lot of these hero stories in Star Wars, they've either gone some, which is nothing wrong with it, right? Because it's your typical story. They've gone through some kind of trauma, or some kind of an experience, like whatever, but they're already going down that good path in a sense. And I think here, which their path was already aligned with the greater good already, like that path had already been established. We're seeing how someone who's trying to save themselves eventually morphs into, oh, I am going to help the greater good. It turns into that. And I think that's, like we continue to say, that's what's so compelling about this show, is that it's diving into a lot of real world things. I mean, how many historical things have we already referenced in this podcast? Which, by the way, if you want to hear more things like that, you should definitely click that subscribe button down below so you can join the hundreds and eventually thousands and eventually
millions
of fans that will be following pending rebrand and all the wonderful shows that we put out. But we've brought up historical context in how in this, and that's what we're seeing here, right? Like, this show is taking so many pieces of that. It's more than just good versus evil, which is what a lot of Star Wars has been about. Even though I think they're trying to make a break from that, and there's nothing wrong with that's what it was about, because we're also living in a world at that time where there was a very fine line between what's good and evil. Nowadays, you have to, you even after checking multiple sources, you don't know what's true and what's not. Especially with the situation that's going on right now. I can't tell you how many different accounts or things that I've read or people, experts that have been talking, and I've gone from, I agree with this, no, I agree with this side, no, I'm with this, now I'm with that, because nothing is black and white anymore. It's gray, like us. But that's how it lines up with this show. It's a great reflection of what we're experiencing today historically.
And that's the story Tony Gilroy wants to tell us. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
So
when he said, I don't have loyalty to Star Wars, I want to tell this story. It just happens to align with the principles and ideals of a larger galaxy, if you will. And I love your point, Uther, about it has to be personal for you. It has to be when your own self-interests fall into alignment with whatever ideals or principles that your, quote, revolution and rebellion is formed upon. Once those two become in sync, then obviously then you can become that person who will sacrifice all for the cause or the greater good or what have you. But until, like you say, until it hits home.
Well, it's almost like you have to catch up to it, right? Like, he's going to catch up to the cause. What's affecting him is going to get him to catch up to the cause.
Right.
So, anyway, all right, let's rate this bad boy.
Absolutely. Now we give it the color of the lightsaber. And I'll kick it off this week because I was enthralled. Both of these episodes were fantastic. I give them both green lightsabers all the way.
I do as well. Glowing green, wonderful, beautiful Yoda lightsabers. There's no doubt in my mind. This series is really taking Star Wars in a different direction somewhere it needs to go.
It's the Green Uno card this week, ladies and gentlemen, for these episodes. If I had to rate them separately, and like I say, I kind of treat them as just one big 90-minute show, I might have gone with a cerulean blue for the second episode because it really was almost like an appetizer, moving the pieces, that classic moving the pieces into place episode. All the payoff comes in the third episode, Reckoning. But jointly, if I'm going to rate them together, let's go with Emerald Green this week.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to more Andor. I'm really excited. I'm glad we decided to go in this direction because this is kind of the Star Wars I've always hoped for. It's a little bit more highbrow, a little bit more contemplative. If you all out there here in this hemisphere or abroad in other hemispheres or in galaxies far, far away want to keep up with our analysis of Andor and or future Star Wars content and all of our other shows, again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, drop us a comment. What did you think about episodes 2 and 3 of Andor? Would you like to have seen a little more Skarsgård? I know I did. And with that, we will leave you with a May the Force be with you.
And also with you.